I'd like to welcome today Ondiege Matthew from Dance into Space, who's taking time to share a little bit about himself and his practice in integrated dance. Welcome, Ondiege, and thank you so much for taking time to meet with us today. Maybe we can start with you telling us a little about yourself, where you work, with whom you work, and then we can talk about how you got into integrated dance.
Thank you for inviting me to this forum to have a conversation about my work. I have been a dancer for the last 31 years. I did not start really from dance. I started from theater as an actor and stage actor. But my main interest was in dance, even if I was working in those productions. We were trying to do dance dramas and dance theater here and there. I kind of shot off with dance sometime in the mid-90s. And about 10 years later, I started working within mixed ability because of my exposure, experience, and training that I had as a contemporary dancer in Africa. I worked the first time in 2005 with people with disability from this country, from Kenya, an open workshop for people who had an interest in dance, but also were different. I think through that, I have also learned a lot of techniques and ideas of how to develop dance creations, working with people with disability. And I've also had to manage the company, to move the company to the next level, where we actually are catering for training and creations and some mentorship programs within Dance into Space. So it has been about 18 years since we started working with people with disability in contemporary dance. We've also made inroads as arts within the arts sector, but also within the disability area and social areas about issues that concern people with disability.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how you moved from the workshops into your company?
One of the things that we did earlier was to try and develop the group of people who would perform. And through that, we had moments of experiences and sharing ideas and exchanges. But then slowly, we actually formalized the group that gathered people with disability together with those without disability. The majority without disability had come from the men's dance practice because they had been dancers before, but those with disability were purely new to performing arts. They were purely new to performance as a concept and even as a practice. So we had to get some of the structures necessary that would be able to manage the work, also bringing in these people with disability. We knew that we had to expand the scope of the work because it's not just the artists without disability, but also a new constituency of people who have been marginalized in the community. We had to think about how to integrate them into a company that had structures, opportunities, facilities, and even resources to keep the work going. One of the main things we do at the company is to realize creations, but before that, we do training. It is very important for us to empower the artists we're working with the skills necessary as performers and the understanding of theater. And then we begin to create work together. Not everybody is ready to work as an artist. Therefore, the training is important to polish people to become artists, and at the same time to give them the skills necessary to operate. That's how the company was formed and strengthened.
So how many are in the company, Ondiege?
I think we have worked with many people. The company is not operating as an outfit where you can count members. It's not about membership. It's about the creatives who are available. So much that at least almost 100, if not more, have passed through the workshops and the training programs. But there's freedom where they can always go and work with other people. And I'm talking about people with disability. We have a kind of an understanding that also working with other people, with other companies and getting involved in other projects. Then when they come back to the company, there's a kind of growth and it also builds the company. So right now we have, let's say, a regular team of 11. And this involves people with disability who are dancers, around 4 of them. And then another 4 or 5 people, dancers without disability, including myself. And then a small team of administration who support in the areas of documentation and logistics. We always find ways of contracting regular artists to come back through the training and productions when we have projects going. And that is also because of limited resources.
That makes sense. So can you tell us about your training program? What does it involve? And what are the challenges with disabled dancers? They can't go to dance school, for example.
Our training is more in-house. As a company, we train people who would like to work with. This comes as an opportunity during projects that we have a factor in a training program before the part of the project. Maybe it's half the time to train a team of people to work with. So it is an in-house training program for dancers who would like to work with. And we also kind of decentralize from the city to open up to new artists coming from the other regions, not just living in the town. Actually, for about 13 years, we were working at the Go Down Art Center, one of the biggest art centers in this region, Nairobi. So the company had an office and a studio. But later on, the center was closed down and we had to find other spaces to move into. Nairobi is a bit expensive, especially if you have a team, a company that needed bigger space like that. We moved to another suburb within Nairobi for about 4 years. We realized that it was better to relocate. We were ignited by an idea called decentralization. We wanted to build an audience for contemporary dance. For this decentralization work, it meant going out there, out of the city. We went down to Sierra and identified that space. We also wanted to make our dance visible. So we take it out of the conventional theaters. We found a community that was interesting and were willing to get into such an initiative. We want our artists to have a residential space, so when they come to projects, we can focus and work within a few days and get the production ready and bring it back to Nairobi or show it in Mombasa. Working as dancers with physical disability and more challenges nationally. So there's a potential of growing a good community of dancers and of course building this center to become a fully fledged professional training center, both for dancers with disability and those without, and especially so that we can build traditional dance vocabularies from that region and face of contemporary dance. It's our dream that we have this permanent space for the future.
That's really interesting. So how do you actually find and build capacity?
The capacity for dancers, it's also about the social setting that we are operating in. So for example, in terms of finding dancers with disability, we always have to plug into institutions and organizations that are already working with people with disability. We plug into their programs and interest to take up dance and even other creative or cultural practices for us to get artists to train. In terms of building their capacity, it is not really just purely an artistic capacity that we're building. That is very important for us, but also to understand the society we're working in and how therefore performance becomes relevant. We partner with organizations that are working in human rights or disability rights or health or reproductive health issues or matters of sexuality. So the capacity building is not just for them to train as artists, but also to become responsible citizens and play roles of leadership, influence others, can stand out as role models, and can speak on behalf of others. Our dancers have been able to speak out, but because of the dance program, which allows them to empower themselves and to pick this knowledge and to run with it, they are now a different people. So that is part of the capacity building that we do. First of all, it's good for us to participate in as many as possible because our dancers get to meet other dancers and they get to learn from other dancers.
So you're working in a holistic way, not just in terms of dance, but also in terms of community action, citizenship, belonging, capacity building in terms of research with your dancers and with organizations that are, as you say, based in various social justice fora. So that's a holistic approach. So it's not only working outside in, but also inside out. And I'm really interested in two things. both how you engage audiences that maybe don't have the same views that you have around these issues. So maybe talk a little bit about how you engage the audiences and where the dialogue happens around challenging views, for example, on disability sexuality, the fact that people generally see disabled people as being asexual. How do you, and how does the dance provoke those conversations or challenges with audiences?
Oh, it's not very easy. Building an audience for us has been to tackle these societal issues, because this is what pulls our audience. The idea of lack of access, for example, for people with disability, and access to structures, access to buildings, to transport or mobility aids, this alone is in itself an agenda that can also bring government to listen. And so civil societies have become partly our major audience when it comes to processing these societal issues, because it brings them in as players in those sectors. So that is one way that we have managed to reach audiences, because we tackle issues that they think have an identifiable concern to them. The greatest challenge we face after building audiences for mixed ability is that the public is not ready to view disability as entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a fact. So it is a pathos, can we use it to pull sympathy? Can we use it to change behaviors, to influence society in one way or the other? But can we use it for entertainment? We don't even get events inviting us. Nobody in their festive mind thinks that a group of dancers with disability would be a good occasion to entertain, unless the guests have something to do with disability. So in a way, we have also capitalized on that we target a segment of community or audiences that have an inclination towards understanding these disability issues. In fact, I knew that getting mixed ability as a dancer, as a choreographer, was going to make my work less popular in the general entertainment arena, because it would be a special art. It requires special people with special occasions. But it is a sweet place to be in, because I work tirelessly to break that stereotype,
Seeing everybody that we see in our society on our stage. And I think that's a really important thing, that whoever you are, you're represented. And it's just different people in different bodies doing amazing things, which brings us to the whole thing of professional, that yours is a professional company. This isn't some community work. You train, you do professional work that's at a high standard. You train the dancers to be professional dancers. And this brings us to your point that you made about the importance of sharing and comparing with other professional companies and festivals. I know that Lliane Lutz's Flatfoot Dance Company spent some time with you in February this year, and also that you've just gone to the Sibikwa Body Moves Festival in South Africa. Can you talk a little bit about how those encounters with professional companies have impacted you, but also maybe you've impacted them in that kind of reciprocal professional engagement with other companies?
The idea of allowing artists to work with others in a company, in a way, for me, is the only way to build the standards of performance at the company. We're not just comparing by looking at what others are doing, but by being part of what they're doing. So that means we are actually working in tandem with what you'd call the landscape, the standards. I think I pick it from my experience as a freelance actor. The skills and the exposure that you had, having worked with somebody else, enables another director to give you a chance, because they feel like they have less work to do in terms of training you, you are familiar with some techniques, skills, and approaches, and therefore you're easy to work with as a professional. And when they come back to the company, sometimes I get this brilliant surprise from the artists that I worked with, coming back and saying, oh no, but I went to such and such a workshop, because these are people who have minds and bodies that are really prepared and very open to do new things, simply because they encounter new artists and new approaches. They also built the company. Sometimes when we have work that demands for a diverse, a company coming from Europe, coming to Africa, probably to train. And it's more like imparting skills from one direction. And I think my concept of exchanges has been that we can learn from a group, let's say in the UK, but the group also learns from us. I try to encourage young people in the company to take up workshops, take up classes, even in the warm-up sessions, in the training sessions, to take up responsibilities, to volunteer, to teach, to train.
So I think not only North-South, but also South-South exchanges. What we've discovered through the network is that there's really a lot of experience on the continent. One of the things we're seeing is an increase in festivals for this work, which is interesting because it creates critical mass. So it's not just, some odd people doing work over there, but it's professional and a kind of field opening up. And that's also building audiences beyond people that are interested because they're either friends or it's their area of research. It's a whole new way of creating performance and choreographies, because the bodies are different, so the choreographies are different. So it's opening dance and contemporary dance in a new way.
The truth is that mixed ability is the next avant-garde. It is a beautiful experimental space. It is providing both people with disability and people without disability, a chance to experiment with their body possibilities. And I think for me as a dancer, as a choreographer, and as an experimentalist, this is the best space to play around with ideas, because there are no rules yet. In fact, the audience is slowly beginning to appreciate that all the other forms of entertainment are being exhausted. So it's upon us to get out there and tell them that there's this new form of art, and it is all-inclusive. This is in a way something that we can use to bring in an audience, to build the audiences for this kind of work. I think one of the things we could be able to do is to find a way of organizing completely well-done festival of dance here first, to create visibility, and then you go deeper and do a festival of mixed ability. It's a festival bringing in groups from Uganda and Rwanda. I really admire what's going on in South Africa right now, because we can count close to 4 or 5 groups of mixed ability alone, and that can sustain a festival, even if it is a 2-day festival.
That's interesting, around what makes a festival possible and viable as a strategy for developing audiences, but also developing connections between companies. I'd really like to bring Lliane in, because she's done work both on festivals, also on not just mainstream dance, but also increasingly in the access area of dance. And I know she's also done collaborative work with a number of companies. So it would really be interesting to see her dialogue with you on this.
Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Ondiege and I have known each other for a very long time, and have had the great privilege of sharing a workspace together. So I've been listening very attentively to the beautiful conversation that's been happening. And I suppose in a way, because of the privilege of having been in CII and been with Ondiege in those beautiful workshops and the collaborations and partnerships that we have, I'm interested to push you a little bit, Ondiege, to talk a little bit about what you actually do in the studio. Because I found it very inspiring in the way in which you actually run a class, run a training session with dancers, to use your terminology of mixed abilities. And I'm interested to ask you to talk about that, and to talk about what I believe is a very profound methodology of working that you are developing.
Yeah, I In my work in the studio, normally I would first of all break it into two parts. And the first part is the training component. It's more like preparing the dancers for the work ahead. And that means introducing them to certain techniques which I think would be able to work in the choreography that I want to work on. I think about the creation, because normally I would not be doing a training if I'm not interested in doing a creation. And I know some people disagree with me, but I find it really a lot of work and also very expensive to just teach for the sake of teaching. I normally insist on training people that I work with. So I would visualize the performance, and then I would be able to look at my dancers, whether they are new to me or they are old, and see whether they can actually meet that expectation. And in most cases, it will be a bit of adjustment here and there, but it will be more like working with what they can do. In fact, most of my work will be limited to the ability of those I'm working with. I am not very good at stretching people to do something beyond their limits, because for that, in my opinion, they are becoming plastic. To deliver the work, the human body becomes like a machine. I let them navigate their own direction and then find something. Then I work with that. And so most of the dancers are not generally doing something beyond their means, to work and explore only up to their limits, especially those with disability. And so my studio work is broken down into those two parts: first training and then choreography. In the training, there is to share the technique with dancers. It will be more like the technique of body possibilities, body movement, and how can you express yourself further when you embrace this vocabulary or this pattern or this style of moving. In the second phase of the choreography, it's more about exploring how to create work by being as organic as possible, how to tell my story by just being very generous and genuine, and honest with it. And therefore, choreographic techniques are not things that I would train, but just work with. Sometimes I wouldn't explain why I am applying some idea, why I'm applying some technique, why I'm doing some approach. It takes time to do that. I just do it, but I hope that they can learn, that they can see the reason why I'm doing it, that it is a choreographic technique. Maybe it is flying low, or maybe it is playing with contact improvisation. And so we want to stick to this technique. And, again, in the studio, I always make time for people to analyze. It's more like a theory part of the creation. I like it when people sit back and analyze and retrace the journey of the practical bit and just critically reason and consider other ideas. I think most of my choreographies are ideologically motivated, because I try to tackle concerns within the society, existential issues. So eventually, I want to approach them as, information that I have. And also want them to investigate issues coming from the sites they visit. Mm-hmm. Cultural issues, economic issues, political issues. And I don't think that art is devoid of any politics. It will be extremely unfair to think that we can work in a particular community setting and not touch on the things that concern them, whether it is leadership or management or their health, and actually come out with a true reflection of what they observe.
Yeah.
My studio work in terms of creation and training is divided in those three parts. There's a training component, there is a choreographic creation component, and there is the theory to reflect, to understand the environment in the bigger picture, the idea.
And having experienced that three-tiered process, I found it very inclusive. I found it very democratic, because everybody in the room, although you as the choreographer have a vision or a sense of where you're going, everyone in the room gets to participate. It's a really inclusive way of getting participation. And I know you speak about asking people to work to their abilities, but I noticed certainly in those spaces that people did surprise themselves, that sometimes what we think are our endpoints were really shifted in those moments. And I really love the idea of doing the warm-up and doing the finding a way your body can move in the space with certain instructions, set exercises, but also allowing people to find versions or variations that worked for their own capacities. And then the choreographic process and the really beautiful reflection where everyone gets to speak and to talk about what they felt on the Kit Mackay rocks, or what it felt like to rub against another person's body in a kind of space. So leading on from that, which is for me a very inclusive and a very beautiful process, and one that I was very grateful to participate in earlier this year. I'm wondering if you reflect on that as a kind of evolving technique that you are creating, and that we are shifting the concept of technique. I think the old sort of modern, postmodern Euro-American axis of technique is contract, release, go to the floor, stand up. But we are really rethinking notions of techniques as being not necessarily a set series of movements, but as instructions. I'm maybe reflecting on something like the Axis syllabus, where, you know, Freya Faust talks about the idea that for him, his technique is really that we do no harm to the skeleton. And that's his technique. So it's an evolving around series of movements that are simply about creating profound ways to work with the body. And so I'm wondering if you reflect on that in your own work, Ondiege.
Yes. My thoughts on technique is that, first of all, I find technique very controversial in contemporary dance. And maybe it's because of the background I've had and the experience and the way it is being perceived in Africa. For a long time, I think the realization of African technique was also being validated by people who are not Africans. I remember the efforts to define contemporary African dance when we would even appear in some of those graphic encounters of the 90s. And more or less programmed by the French. And the general impression that emerged out of those conversations, those interactions, initially there were, I think it happened in South Africa, then happened in Madagascar, then went to West Africa, then disappeared in France. But it was African choreographic encounters, you know? And I think some of the controversial things that emerged, even if it was very subtle, was that who really defines African dance technique? And are African dancers able to define their work? But the demands for them to be able to articulate, especially in English or in French, what they're practicing. And for me, it's imagined that if you cannot do that, then you don't have technique.
It's a really profound provocation to the idea of who sits at the center of defining. And that's why I'm really interested, particularly in an artist like you, who is constructing a technique, but not in the kind of Euro-American centered way of thinking, but in a way that really embraces what's present in the room. You know, I find that provocation really beautiful.
Yes.
Do you think it's a particularly African thing, what you do, sitting in East Africa? Do you think this methodology, which is really very much about working with disabled and non-disabled dancers, is very much about finding whoever's in the room and finding ways of working? Do you think this methodology is particularly African?
Well, partly yes. For me, we all have technique, because I eventually think that technique is just a way and a process within which you arrive at something. I arrive at my works. It may be very different from other people's ways and approaches. And therefore, technique is just the process. And I am in a position to step by step articulate or break down the process that I achieve my work. For most of us, to be able to document this process in a very well-structured way, then it can be shared by others who are not necessarily dancers. And I think that is the bit that is remaining for us. But I can't do it alone. You can't document, you don't document. We need other structures, other sectors, other people to mirror what we're doing so that they can actually document this for us. And therefore, it's about partnership with other people to combine forces, to find, I have a technique, a process, I have an idea, I have a methodology.
Yeah, I hope, Ondiege, why we're so grateful that you're speaking to us, is that this is the beginning. In no way, you know, the whole story, but I hope that this space to also hear you talk about your work is a beginning. A good segue, because I also wanted to say, we are talking about the way in which you spoke articulately about the way in which art is political, and that there's no art that isn't political. And I'm interested particularly in the work in integrated or mixed dance, as you like to call it, is that idea of really negotiating belonging and the idea of what constitutes a Kenyan dancer. I listen with a great sense of mourning, because I feel this is a thing that we share on the continent, that sometimes when you work in integrated arts, people come to you and say, shame, you're doing such good work, as if you're a social worker. And it's a response that I dislike, because I'm not a social worker, I'm an artist, but I am also in my art addressing social concerns. And in this instance, the idea of inclusion or exclusion around particularly disability. And I'm wondering how you respond to that. Do you feel that your work is somehow addressing belonging, citizenship?
Yes, I think this question has come up earlier. We were talking about the constitutionalism and how we as artists are participating in that. Are we really contributing to what the Constitution looks for? And yes, we in our mixed ability work, one of the things that comes across all the time when we have to build our audience with people who are not necessarily art followers is that we even find ourselves quoting what is in the Constitution. We're talking about Article 54 of the Kenyan Constitution that affirms that people with disability have a right to access education, have a right to access benefits, cultural, technology, and have a right to stand up for their rights and to speak out against oppression and things like that. And also the government itself have had some integrated program that targeted people with disability to be given priority when it comes to government tenders and government contracts towards matters and citizenship. And you know, one of the things that I think my work has stood out for so far is the artists have been shaped, the people who have come through the training programs have been shaped as advocates. They are actually advocating for issues that we were not even necessarily processing in the dance performance. Just because they've been part of a dance process that has allowed them to know how to translocate social issues away from being social workers into being artists, they have also stood out to speak against certain things that affect them as individuals and also affect people who they are close to, who are also people with disability. They have been seen as role models. And so they have become a bit influential. Someone like Pam has become kind of a person who is leading a small group of people with disability at the village level. And she's being listened to so much because she's involved in this dance process. She is somehow exposed. And so, yes, we are championing works that are more like what social workers would be doing. It is not an easy position for us as artists, being as role models in society and at the same time developing the work and pushing their creative, artistic quality work. And that inevitably is what disability work is pointing us towards. When we started, by the way, you know, I had to be very clear to even people with disability that we are not an NGO that is going to take charge of your welfare. So even if we do an audition, we just select you to become an artist, and we want you to understand that you should operate like all artists operate, not because you have a disability. And somehow, some people felt like, hey, now we're being mean, you know? that we this nice organization that will take everybody with disability on board. And we said, wait, there's a line here. This line is creative work. Because if we don't do that, then we will lose our purpose.
Yeah.
For a long time, we want to distance ourselves from social work, but only come into social work when necessary.
I love the story with Pam, who is a very profound performer and has worked with you for many, many years. But I really like the idea that whoever we work with requires our care and our support. But at the end of the day, our methodology is dance. And so it's that idea of what we do and really putting the art first. I love the discussion about social work, community work, artwork, and it's an unresolved one. And I think it's an unresolved one for the African continent, where there is so much human rights work still to do around disability before we even get to the art. So thank you for that. I'm going to hand over to Yvette, who might have a final few questions. Thank you, Ondiege, very much. Always beautiful to chat with you.
It's wonderful to see, artists with years of experience, but also having worked together in dialogue with one another about these complex considerations. I also love, Ondiege, the dialogue to actually be able to formulate those methodologies, and we're really grateful that you're part of this. I think my final question is there anything that you feel is important for us to consider as we analyze this work in the African context?
I think one or two, generally in terms of contemporary dance, without even delving into the mixed ability context, but just generally, we as contemporary dancers in Africa are not just artists. We are advocates, we are activists, and a good chunk of our work is activism. And I think we need to move beyond this. When the continent eventually realizes the final possibility of just being artists without necessarily activists. And we are activists all the time because 90% of our work is just appealing to the public, appealing to civil society, appealing to government, always saying, oh, please look at us, oh, please accept our issues, oh, please make consideration. I think it's time we're saying we are deep into the arts and we're not always appealing for recognition. We need to reach a level where we are really celebrating. And I think we have never celebrated. Contemporary artists in Africa, we never celebrate. We're always pushing. We're always fighting. Our performances have an agenda of trying to tune people to respect us. But I think we need to demand for that respect. I think we need to build it together in Africa so that we have some legitimacy around us. And I think that's something important.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the time you've taken today to share your work, your thoughts, your experience. It's invaluable and it's greatly appreciated. And also thank you to Lliane Lutz for joining us as an artist who's also done a lot of work in this field. So with that, we end the session with thanks to everyone.
Thank you very much.